Do you want Instagrammers or TikTokers to post about your brand? Or do you actually want to engage creators who influence their audience to buy your product? If you're in the latter of those two, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Winfluence, the Influence Marketing Podcast. Hello again, friends. Thanks for tuning in to Winfluence, the Influence Marketing Podcast. There's another State of the Industry report out this month. It actually came last week from Linqia, which is one of the enterprise influencer marketing software companies out there. These reports are always useful, so I like to report on them here on the show. If you want to read the full report for yourself, which I can encourage you to do, you go to their website, you sign up and trade your email address for their research. You become a lead in their platform. That's how B2B marketing often works, but it's a fair trade. And who knows, Linqia might be just what your company needs. So go do it. We'll certainly share the link to do so in our show notes for this episode. But Keith Bendies, who is the Vice President of Strategy for Linqia, is here today to dig into the highlights of the report with us. He's also the co-host of another great podcast, by the way. It's called Creator Economy Live, so go check that out when you have a moment. As well, as always, links in show notes. Keith knows the influencer space as well as anyone, and you know what that means. We just turned on the mics and cameras and had a fun conversation I think you'll enjoy. We hit on plenty of the report insights as well, so you'll be informed as much as, or even more so, than entertained on the show today. Here are some nuggets of the report and what they surface that we're going to touch on a little bit. Influencer budgets are increasing. 75.5% of Linqia's survey respondents either increased or remained unchanged from last year's spending. Brands are using influencer content in more places. It's no longer about organic posts with a few paid ads. Influencer creative is driving brand creative now. Paid amplification is bigger than you thought. More than half of the brands are spending at least half of their budgets on media amplification, but there are still challenges. ROI is still the big one. And of course, new topics like AI, threads, and creator-generated content, which will distinguish from user-generated content, makes its first appearance in the Linqia study. We'll dig in more with Keith Bendies from Linqia today on the show. As always, this episode of Winfluence is presented by Scipio.ai. Speaking of user-generated content, Scipio helps brands transform their digital marketing with UGC videos and images at scale. Why? Shopify data shows user-generated content quadruples your ad click-through rates. UGC drives as much as 7 times more engagement on social media. UGC improves website conversions by as much as 29% and email click-through rates by as much as 73%. UGC is also more trusted by consumers than even traditional influencer content. Scipio.ai plugs you into your own community of users who create great content or a more broad set of content creators and helps you encourage them to do that for your brand. Your digital marketing performs better. You don't have to go looking for content to use for paid or owned campaigns. And we've got a team to manage it all for you if you like. Come see us at Scipio.ai if you want me to personally show you the platform and how we can solve your digital marketing performance problems with high-performing UGC. Just go to jasonfalls.co/Scipio. Fill out that form and I'll personally set up time to chat with you and show you the platform. That's jasonfalls.co/Scipio, CIPIO. And seriously, folks, we can really make your marketing perform better and take a handful of content problems off your hands. jasonfalls.co/Scipio. Another check on the state of influencer marketing in 2023 is in front of us. Keith Bendies from Linqia is next on Winfluence. So, Keith, give us the level set on this study, this survey. Who was surveyed? What was the methodology behind it, so we know what we're dealing with?
Yeah, so it's the State of Influencer Marketing Report. We've been doing this every year. It gets great responses, so we're going to continue doing it for as long as we can. But it's very focused on enterprise marketers. So it's very large brands and agencies across a host of verticals. We have auto, financial services, healthcare, CPG, all food bev, alcohol. It's a wide range of people who respond, but it's all focused at the enterprise level. So these are people who are spending with influencer marketing, oftentimes scaled spending. And what we're trying to decipher so that we can educate the industry is how are these bigger brands doing it? How are they justifying the spend? How are they measuring? What types of creators they're working with, et cetera. So we had over 250 respondents this year and very interesting results, I thought.
Very good. Yeah, I always look for the number of respondents because sometimes it's, oh, we surveyed 40 people. I'm like, well, that doesn't tell me a whole lot. I mean, you can pull some insights out of that, but 250 from that audience group is a pretty good panel. So that's good to know. So spend is up, which is good for everybody in the industry. But what are some of the nuances in there that might make that insight more than just, well, yeah, duh, budgets are up, spend is up. We get that. But what are some of the reading between the lines of that you were able to pull out of that data in that survey?
Yeah, I mean, budgets are up sounds so intuitive because we're in such a hot space. But honestly, I mean, the marketing industry is somewhat contracted. Anytime there's an economic downturn, marketing is typically the first to get pulled. So we are seeing marketing budgets at the highest level when you look at research in this space contracting. Digital is growing, social is growing even more, and influencer tends to grow even further than those others. So budgets are going up. It was interesting given that dynamic where the sources of funds are. I actually anticipated less would be incremental to the marketing budget given marketing cuts this year, but that was the number one answer from sources of funds. But you are also seeing funds being pulled from other places. It could be paid social going to more organic influencer. We saw a little CTV and radio. So it does seem, and that confirms with a lot of the clients we're working with, where even when their marketing budgets are getting smaller, they're still either maintaining or increasing their influencer and creator budget. So sources of funds was interesting. And I do still think anytime you have an economic downturn year for a segment of marketing to grow is impressive.
Yeah, there's no argument from me on that one for sure. I'm really interested more in the sources of funding because, my follow-up question was going to be if it's not incremental, which I know you said a lot of it is, and you mentioned a couple of examples, but like, is traditional advertising being taken from for this? What are the more specifics of the other channels that are sacrificing their funds to fuel more influencer marketing? I find that really intriguing.
Yeah. So to give you exact numbers, and again, it comes from multiple sources too. So you can have multiple selections that they make, but 60% said incremental, which again was pretty surprised to hear that. 38% said social. So social just being pulled and that's where they're spending it. TV radio was 17%. So no question there's TV radio. PR was 15%. Wow. Experiential was 12%. And then display was 7%. And then other was 7%. So TV radio being third on that list is a little surprising, although I think a lot of people are realizing this is more efficient spend and performance spend. So again, in an economic downturn, you do start to move mid-lower in funnel. So it makes sense that the highest of upper funnel of TV radio starts to move more to the mid funnel. So that was interesting to see that at 17%. And then social, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it could be paid social that they're moving it from. It could be more organic content creation that you would have done as a brand through studios going more towards influencer content creation.
Yeah, I like to look at these things. And of course, this is an assumption. I don't know that this is true unless you follow up with, qualifying questions. But when you've got, money moving from advertising channels and whatnot, I kind of pull back and say, okay, is this another, I like to say, use the word on this show a lot, tea leaf. Is this another tea leaf that I'm seeing that's telling me that brands are understanding that influencer / user / creator generated content, which we'll all get into a little bit more nuance on that in a little bit, but are brands starting to see that as more effective and therefore they're diverting funds from traditional advertising channels? Is that the cause and effect here? I don't know that there's any way to necessarily read that reasoning in unless you go deep and ask those questions, but what's your thoughts on that? Is this really just more of, hey, influencers are proving to be more effective and therefore that's where the marketing dollars are going?
I think it's a little bit of everything. So I think a lot of tests are happening right now, especially on social and across social, of BAU content, business as usual content, versus influencer creator content. And the third pixel in a lot of these tests are BAU plus influencer creator. And a lot of brands are finding that combination is doing really well. So it's less about now we don't have to do any of this beautified creative production and we can move everything to creator influencer. I still think both places have an effect, but maybe it's less volume of new creative done through professional production, and you more have those hero assets that set the tone for the brand, and then a lot more creator. But yes, another theme in this was the rise of creator generated content, which is when you're working with these creators, they don't post. They're strictly creating content for your owned and paid channels. And that we are definitely seeing an increase this year. And frankly, given the increase and the timing of that increase, I think we're going to see an even bigger percentage when we do this next year.
Yeah, I would say so too. That, and of course, I think that at Scipio.ai, I deal a lot in the user generated content world. So I want let's while we're on that topic, let's visit those two terms a little bit. User generated content, is my definition of it is just content that's created by random social media users without regard to how many followers they have, whether or not they do it intentionally to make money, all that kind of stuff. Creator generated content, I think in your definition, I'll have you clarify for me, is content that an influencer / creator who intends to be an influencer and creator creates, but does not post on their channel. Rather, they create it like they're a graphic designer or production artist for the brand. Is that correct?
Exactly. Because this is paid for, this is co-produced. The brand is usually issuing a brief. They have a process in the content review. So it's a much more coordinated thing than, to your point, UGC, which is really just out in the wild content. And what we're seeing is because they're not posting, brands are wisely deprioritizing following in that instance, not in the influencer instance, in that creator generated content instance, because you don't want to pay for following when reach isn't part of the goal. So you're seeing this whole space emerge where creators with, sub 10,000 followers in that nano range who happen to create very good content. And a lot of them, to your point, some of them are professionals. They're producers, they're videographers, they're photographers, they're post-production people. They know how to create elevated qualities of content. And brands look at that as a bit of a professional production replacement because it's much more cost efficient, much quicker, and you could have multiple people in multiple different angles and diverse content.
Well, I think it's important for the creators out there, and certainly the brands and agencies too, but for the creators out there that are watching or listening, it's important to know that you have that opportunity when you're working with brands to say, hey, maybe I'm not a brand fit or a brand alignment for this particular brand in terms of taking their content to my audience, but I have the talent and skills to create the type of content that they like and they want. And so now all of a sudden you can position yourself as, for all intents and purposes, a freelancer or, outsourced creative design talent, production talent, in order to be able to have creator generated content that the brand is using. So if you are a creator out there and you're not doing that, not offering that up as a service, that's another, potential revenue stream. For exactly. You to
and it doesn't
explore.
Flood your feed at that point then with sponsored content. So if you have too many brands even and you're hesitant to have that much sponsored content in your feed, this is an off-feed way to monetize as well. And you're seeing brands, part of the report said that 18% are spending 7 figures or more, and the number of campaigns they're running per year is increasing, and there's an always-on component that's very interesting here. So I think most brands are not viewing this anymore as one-off tactical things. They're looking at an always-on strategy. There's probably campaigns that they have to hit with certain time periods and they are trying to influence. But then there is that always-on everyday content that they need to fill up their social feeds. And because you need so much of it these days, they're not able to do it in-house. So I think the CGC is a really smart way of doing it.
Sure is. Micro influencers have been the rage for brands for a couple of years now, but this year's survey, I think, shows some diversifying interests there. What are you seeing in terms of how frequently brands are using micro influencers versus the other sort of, elevated stages of influence?
Yeah, and micro is still hugely in demand. So I don't want to take anything away from micro. That's still the vast majority of what we're seing brands interested in having micro presence on a campaign. But this was the first year that we saw macro, just from a respondent's perspective, take the number one position in the type and tier of creator you're working with as a brand at the enterprise level. There's a few things to take away from this. One is they are looking for fewer, bigger, better. They want to have deeper partnerships with these creators and influencers. It's very hard to do that at the type of scale. It used to be, let me get as many on a program as humanly possible and try to push out as much content as possible. And now I think there's a much more conscious effort to go fewer, bigger, better. It helps with legal compliance reviews. It helps with deepening the relationship, even beyond posting, talking to the creator. Maybe they're informing product or giving feedback. So I think the deeper relationship is definitely at play here. The other thing that I don't think we can ignore, though, is rates is at play here too. Yes. I think years ago, most brands would say, if I have 4 creators at 25K following and 1 at 100K following, if the cost is equal, it's 4x for the 100. I kind of do want the 4 at the 25 because I get more diverse content. I can speak to different audiences. They're more niche. But now the 25, it might be a 2 equates to the 100, or maybe even 1 in some instances where the 25's rate is the 100 rate. So I think you're seeing this rise in micro rates where brands are also maybe saying, hey, this balance isn't making sense anymore. And maybe we do want to go bigger and kind of spend less money in totality.
Yeah, I think I was going to follow up with the ask of do you think there's a correlation that less micro influencers means you're having to pay each creator more, and creator prices, at least in my experience, the last 2 years have just continued to exponentially grow, regardless of the size of their audience. Which that's me being on my soapbox saying, hey, if you're 50,000 followers and you're charging 10 grand for an Instagram reel, you're completely lopsided on what the market has been. And so good luck if you can get that. But I think the inflation of prices that creators and their talent managers are asking for, I think is having a big effect on who brands want to work with.
Unquestionably. And the one thing I would say on the creator side of that equation is really, really strong performance short form video content is significantly harder to make than quality still images or what used to be an Instagram story, which is you hit record, speak to the camera, hit off, and you send that video. So the actual skill set you need and the work it takes to do something good in short form video is much higher. And so I agree with rates going up to reflect the difficulty of work happening. And that's why I also think rates by tier and size of following is slowly going away. You can't really judge it that way. It's a combination of following and the quality and style of video content. And that's why you see a lot of influencers with maybe lower followings, but outrageously amazing video garnering significantly higher rates than their following would have garnered, 3-5 years ago.
Man, if we could just come up with a magic formula that said, hey, there's a portion of your fee is for reaching your audience, a portion of your fee is for the quality of your content, and a portion of your fee is for how successful you can convert customers and drive sales. We could figure that out. We'd have we could retire probably, right?
For sure. But if you're a brand, the math to me is, hey, how much would it take to have an army here or a creative agency or whatever it needs to do the volume of content I need to build an ongoing community so that I have relevance in this marketplace long term? And sure, if that cost is significantly less than outsourcing to creators, by all means do it. I think for most brands, they're going to tell you it's definitely not.
Definitely not. We are talking about the state of influencer marketing in 2023, a new report from Linqia, and we're talking about it with Linqia's VP of Strategy, Keith Bendies. When we come back, we'll see what the survey had to say about threads, AI, and more. Don't go away. Welcome back to Winfluence, talking to Keith Bendies from Linqia and the Creator Economy Live podcast, by the way, today. Brands are spending more on influencers, drifting into smaller groups of larger audience creators rather than focusing as much on micro influencers and larger groups for their campaigns. That's the past. Now let's look at the future. Keith, Threads popped into this year's report as expected because it's new. And it's hot to a degree. I'll admit that I'm struggling with even using it, much less focusing on how to factor in creator campaigns to it. But 3/4 of the audience you surveyed has designs on it. Tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on Threads and where we're going with it.
Yeah, the survey was issued in the summer, so Threads had just dropped, was the hottest topic in marketing. So I'd be curious if we reissued this survey right now, a few months later, what would those numbers actually be? And I anticipate they'd be very different. But yeah, 75% said that they do plan to test with influencers in the next 12 months on Threads. Now, that's not how many plan to create a Threads account or post on Threads. That's literally work with influencers on Threads. So that's even deeper than the first two. So we were surprised to see the number that high, although I wonder what it would be moving forward. The big question, as I talk to brands that I think they have, that's such a valid question that they want to test, is given all the algorithm changes on Instagram, if you had 1 million followers on Instagram and you joined Threads, and let's say you have close to that, because I think most people did bring their follows with them, and you posted on both platforms, what percent organically, forget about paid, what percent organically would each channel get? And would you get a lot more reach on Threads just given the nature of it being new and the algorithm not being the same as Instagram? I think it is a worthwhile test to just understand those impression and engagement numbers. But if you listen to Creator Economy Live, Brendan and I are definitely not the most bullish on Threads. I think there's a lot of problems with the platform. My bet would be it rolls into Instagram long term, and I don't think 75% of these respondents will actually spend money with influencers in the next 12 months. I think some of this was a product of it was the hottest topic in marketing that the month this survey was issued.
Yeah, that's fair. Anything new, especially if there are not immediately complementary analytics and metrics tools to go along with it, it's like I'm going to sit and wait until somebody figures that piece out, because if I can't quantify success easily, I don't have time. I've got to move on. So
exactly.
I mean, it changes if the consumer behavior. I mean, if everybody flocked to Threads, all of a sudden, then it would be a little bit different. But if they did that, then someone would be coming up with the analytics solutions quickly. So it'd be a different ballgame. Also, I was very interested to see where brands are leveraging influencer content. This is another, I think, tea leaf thing, that this user-generated content and how that plays in advertising, creator-generated content, how that plays in advertising. Mm-hmm. The planning now is far beyond organic or even paid social. I'm seeing out-of-home, CTV, display. Why do you think it is that brands are now evolving to say, hey, we don't just want to repost this on Instagram, we want to use it in other avenues?
Yeah, it's performance is one of the big ones. So we did have a question on performance, and over 66% of people said it either performs the same as BAU or outperforms BAU. So I think that's one, is just sheer performance and how it's doing in the marketplace. I think the other one is paid media. I mean, I was shocked to see the percentage of people who on every given influencer plan, the majority of their budget goes to media. There was a big chunk that had an even split of it's around 50-50, but a third of them were spending a majority of the influencer budget on paid media. So I think it's the combination of they're doing it in paid media, they're seeing the performance against their brand produced content, and then now it's creeping outside of social. It was, hey, let's start this whole dance on social. Now it's, well, what if we bring that asset to CTV? What if we bring it to digital out of home? What if we bring it to programmatic display? And they're seeing the same results there. And that, I think this will be one of the biggest trends over the next 12 months, is the movement of creator and influencer content beyond social, and how performant we're going to see that content. If you watch CTV, the number of commercials that are influencer, creator, UGC, or even professionally produced to look like TikToks, it's insane. I mean, that raw authenticity is not a social construct anymore. It's an advertising construct.
Yeah, that's true. I think, again, it's just another indicator that idea, that concept for our creators out there watching, of you becoming an extension of the production team or the design team or the creative team of a brand or an agency, is an open avenue, because they're going to start turning around and say, hey, we've got to come up with a new billboard. Which creator are we going to partner with to create the billboard? Right? Because that content is just more authentic if you can tie a third party human being, influencer person to it, user to it, then the public believes it more. And that's what's effective right now. Exactly. A note for our agency and consulting friends out there: when asked how brands are managing influencer marketing programs in 2023, 55% are using some form of agency partner. There's a couple of different breakdowns within the data, but 55% are using one of us, somebody like me. The rest are in-house or using self-serve tech platforms. Keith, I'm curious, what, if any, that you have, is the history on those numbers? Are they moving at all?
Yeah, and keep in mind, this is enterprise brands and agencies. So if you think about the long tail SMBs, challenger brands, they might index the other way, where they're more in-house just based on resourcing and dollars. But for enterprise, we've seen it be a high number, and we've seen it grow. I think the complexity of this space, the number of social platforms, the number of tiers of influencers, the rates and where the rates are, how to measure, it's getting to be such chaos for most brands to be able to do this in-house, and they need such large armies to be able to execute effectively in-house, that they are outsourcing this more and more. And I think they will increasingly outsource this work. I thought it was interesting how many work with specialist influencer agencies now versus your PR, your creative, your media that says, oh, by the way, we can do influencer. The budgets are getting so large that the brands are really demanding specialist influencer agencies where this is all they do and they don't do anything else. So I thought that was really interesting to see what percentage of external agency partners were specialist agencies.
Doesn't hurt my feelings. Bring it on.
Like you and I are in a good position if that's the trend of the data, but not too surprising. The surprising one, or not surprising, honestly, is the ROI being the biggest challenge still. No matter who you're working with, how you're working with them, that has remained the number one challenge in almost all of our reports dating back to the last few years. We're finding it getting more sophisticated. So I actually think if we ask more detailed questions on this topic moving forward, how are they measuring ROI? I think it's getting more sophisticated. You're seeing MMM and MTA modeling now, including all of this paid influencer content. And so it's being measured the same way as anything else in the media landscape. But still, for the total investment that brands are making, and it's getting quite large, they're still needing a lot of help showing what the value of that investment is.
Yeah. And I really feel like that's going to push more and more creators, especially the influencer versus the creator generated content, but the influencer partnerships. I think over the next 3 or 4 years, if you as an influencer cannot prove that you can drive conversions, that you can drive sales, that you can actually persuade your audience to do something, you're going to find your opportunities waning a bit, because those are the creators that brands are going to want to work with, because they've got to draw that line to ROI, and that's becoming more and more important. And yet most content creators are not getting that. They're not seeing performance marketing as something they want to offer because they're afraid they can't drive performance.
Well, that's why, back to the media discussion, I think one of the most crucial things for every brand and creator to think about is, when I'm doing this content, how am I thinking about the way it's going to come to life in a media setting? Because frankly, if you're a creator and even organically your content doesn't hit, if you've designed it effectively in media and from a media perspective far outperforms what the brand is seeing as their average KPIs, that organic miss is going to mean little to nothing to them, because they're going to make up all of that and a lot more when they start bringing it to larger audiences. So just media principles and what works as an ad unit. And if it's going to live outside of social, you should think about that every single time you go to create content. And then if you create it for those things in mind, you might have a lot more success than you think.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, while I got you here, tell folks about the Creator Economy Live. You and Brendan do a great show over there, and give it a little pimp.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So we've been doing the podcast for a few months here now. The Creator Economy Live does their annual conference in Vegas coming up in January. We teamed up with them, Brendan Gann and myself, to do the podcast. Have had unbelievable guests. We had Ryan Serhant recently, Maxine the Corgi, Brian, who runs the account. We have some really exciting ones coming up that I won't speak to until we make the announcements. We had Adrian Layens from TikTok. So we've had unbelievable guests, but we're just breaking down all the top stories in influencer and creator economy. And it's been very well received. So excited to keep that one going too.
That's very cool. Tell people where they can find that on the interwebs, and then tell people where they can find Linqia and you.
Yeah. So the Creator Economy Live, available on all channels for podcasts, so Spotify, Apple, etc. It's called Creator Economy Live. You should see us there. From Linqia's perspective, Linqia.com obviously is where you can contact us, but the report is published on our website. You can access the report. It's been getting really great coverage this week. We launched it only a few days ago. And then myself, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. That's where I post most of my content, but you could find me on there. Any questions, definitely let me know. I'm around to answer them.
Now, as always, we appreciate new and well-prepared research to help inform things. So folks, go to the show notes at jasonfalls.com. The latest episodes are now right there on the homepage, just below the fold, if you will. Click on Keith's handsome mug there, and you'll find the links to download the report, as well as get to all those other places too. Should make it easy for you. Keith, thanks so much for the work and the insights. We certainly appreciate the time, sir.
Thank you. I follow all your stuff. I'm a fan of the pod, so appreciate you having me on.
Glad to have you, man. My big takeaway from the report, as well as several of the latest reports that all sort of align, is the influencer marketing industry is healthy. It's growing. It has some challenges and hiccups, sure, but we've only just begun this journey as creators, brands, agencies, and consultants. At a minimum, we're going to have plenty to keep talking about on shows like this one. So keep listening, and we'll all keep getting smarter and better as practitioners in the influencer marketing space. Don't pass up the chance to dig into the report, which has several other interesting topics and results in there. The links you need are in the show notes. Just go to jasonfalls.com. The latest episodes of Winfluence are now on the homepage, more prominent, so you don't have to go looking for them as much. Find the Keith Bendy's episode, and there you are. If you're on Instagram, you can also find Keith's handsome face as an episode post on my feed at Jason Falls. In the comments of that post with Keith's handsome face, drop hashtag Bendy's, his last name, Bendes, hashtag Bendy's. That will DM you the link you need, thanks to my pals at Stampede Social. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone else who may as well. And if you're enjoying Winfluence overall, help us grow. Tell somebody about the show. You probably know someone who might want to know more about influence marketing. Send them to winfluencepod.com or share a link to this episode on your social network of choice. If you have a moment, drop Winfluence a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. We are on them all. The show is now on video as well. Just look for Jason Falls Winfluence on YouTube to see the show as well as hear it. Winfluence is a production of Falls and Partners and presented by Scipio.ai. The technical production is by MPN Studios. Winfluence airs along MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. Thanks for listening, folks. Let's talk again soon on Winfluence.